Hi everyone, welcome to the Southern Institute of Technology's Certificate in Health Sciences. Well, we're starting this series by looking at the special senses, and we're better to start than with smell. This is a pretty impressive board that you have here.
Thank you.
Firstly, tell me, why do we need to smell?
Well, probably one of the main reasons is as we evolved as human beings, we came across all sorts of new foods, new liquids and so on, and we weren't terribly sure, can I eat it? Is it safe? You know, is it going to kill me or my family? So we tend to smell it. And if it smells good, then we tend to think, okay, it will probably taste good. But we have to be careful. In Southeast Asia, they have this terrible fruit called the durian fruit, and it smells vile. You're not allowed to carry it on aeroplanes, you're not allowed to take it into hotels.
How extreme.
And if we smelt it, you'd go, oh, there's no way I can eat that. But actually, if you do eat it, apparently it tastes very, very nice.
Okay.
So it's not always the case, but generally, if it smells good, it probably tastes good.
It's like fish too, doesn't always smell so crash hot, does it?
Not after a while, no.
So smell is really linked to taste quite dramatically then?
Yeah, smell and taste are both two of our chemical senses. And yeah, they link quite closely, as we'll see later on when we have a wee look at taste.
So, can you do one without the other? Like, say if you've got a really bad cold and you're blocked up, does that usually mean that you won't be able to taste your food?
If your nose is blocked up, you tend to still be able to taste food, strictly speaking, but what you lose is flavour.
Right.
So food doesn't really have any flavour. It just feels bland, tastes bland.
There's not as much point, is there?
No. No.
So how do we smell?
Okay, well, it's a reasonably complicated process, but we can simplify it down. Everything we eat or drink becomes chemicals that come off the surface of what we're having, comes up into the nose, and we've got this little area here, okay. and us about the size of about 15 square centimetres, so a little bit bigger than a stamp. And then we see it better on this illustration here.
Okay.
The little chemical molecules come in onto the area responsible for smell, and there are little wee nerve endings there. And those little nerve endings come up, send signals, and they come up to these three here, for example, and these areas here are responsible for sending electrical signals straight into the brain.
Okay.
And depending what we've been exposed to during our life, what we've smelt, what we've learnt what things smell like, that can trigger memories.
So that's how we instantly know by smelling something if we like the smell of it or not?
More often than not. You get, for example, some people have had a horrible experience like food poisoning, maybe with something like shellfish, for example, and whenever they smell shellfish, straight into the brain, and it brings back that memory of being sick with shellfish, and they might feel sick or things like that, yeah.
And you're talking about these wee nerve endings here, so how many of those do we have?
Well, we have an awful lot. Some people who have a better sense of smell have more of these nerve endings in that area there. So we can have a look here. That little area we talked about in here, humans have about 15 square centimetres of area dedicated to smell in the nasal passage, which sounds impressive. And that means that we can distinguish between about 10,000 different odours.
That's incredible, isn't it?
It is. We're not born with being able to smell 10,000 different odours. It's what we've been exposed to in our life. But if we take something like a dog, dogs have about 150 square centimetres of area dedicated to smell in the nasal passage.
That's incredible. And
because they've got that, dogs have a sense of smell between 100,000 and 1,000,000 times our own.
Gee, what do they need to smell so many, like what on earth could they be smelling so much?
Well, you've got to imagine that, again, it's an evolutionary thing. Wild animals, you've got, is food good, is food not good? It's just very much a survival thing that's evolved over time. which is why, because dogs have such a good sense of smell, we use them for things like tracking people who are lost and smelling out explosives at airports. And that's why they have the dog, for example, a beagle, that they have in international parts of airports to smell out things like fruit and vegetables and meat and illicit drugs and so on, because their sense of smell is so good.
Gee, that's incredible, isn't it?
Mm.
How come humans like different smells? Like I might like the smell of a certain perfume, but someone else wouldn't. How come we're able to smell differently?
If you've never been exposed to a smell before, and then you smell it, your brain has no idea what it's smelling, which is where we get our 10,000 different odours from, being able to having smelled lots of things over time. But again, it comes back to an experience you've had with it, because it's linked right into those memory centres of your brain. You might have a nice perfume, and whenever you smell it, it makes you feel good, but somebody else may have had an experience with that particular scent that wasn't so pleasant, and therefore they don't necessarily like it. And some people are more sensitive to some smells than others.
It's incredible, isn't it, how it all links up?
It's very important in terms of our own safety as well. We put a special chemical into LPG, and human beings are very, very sensitive to it. And it means that if there's a gas leak, for example, you can smell the gas leak, which obviously keeps us alive as well. So it is a very important thing for keeping us safe as well.
Oh, great. Handy wee function smell, isn't it?
Very important function.
Thanks, Craig.
Not a problem.
Hearing is something that we all do every day, but personally I know that I can take it for granted, don't give it much thought, but I'm here with Tracy and she's going to explain the mechanics of how it really works.
Hi Mel.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good.
Tell me, why do we hear?
Well Mel, there's a couple of reasons. The first reason would be, of course, for survival. We need to hear what's coming at us, we need to react to things like smoke alarms, so that's the first reason. The second reason is that we are very social animals and we interact every day mainly through the sound of speech. You think of anything you do, supermarket, doctor, ringing the Inland Revenue Department, it's all done through speech. So to interact, we need speech and we need hearing to hear that speech.
Yes, that's very true. So this is a big grand model we have of an ear here. Can you explain the different parts of the ear to us?
Absolutely. Now, what happens is sound is just a vibration, okay? So we use the outside of the ear, the bit that everyone identifies hearing with, as a net to catch that vibration. Now, the vibration travels through the ear canal and hits the eardrum. It's called a drum because it's just like a drum. It's a piece of skin over an opening. And when
is it quite thin?
It is quite thin. It's very delicate. Now, that vibration will make the skin or the eardrum vibrate. We need that vibration to be a bit stronger, so we use three little bones called the ossicle bones to make that vibration stronger. And when that's strong enough, we transfer it from the bones into the cochlea. Now, the cochlea is just a little snail-like shell that has a whole lot of little, it's got fluid and a whole...
This one here?
This one here.
Really does it like
and it's got little hearing cells in it.
Right.
It's like little hairs. Now, the vibration comes through here, it's amplified by the bones, and it vibrates the fluid in this cochlea. Now, the little hair cells, when that vibration hits the fluid, they will move. And that movement is changed by those little hairs into electrical impulse, and it shoots up this nerve to the brain, and we figure out what we've heard.
Just going back to the eardrum, you hear of people getting burst eardrums. Does it really burst?
It does. What happens, it doesn't happen so much now, but when we got ear infections, we would have infection travelling up from the throat or the nose, and we would get fluid in behind this eardrum here. And because there was nowhere for it to go, the eardrum would eventually burst. Thankfully now we have antibiotics which treats the ear infection before that happens.
Right.
Of course you can still get a burst eardrum through things like diving when the pressure hasn't equalised on both sides and things like that.
Great. And how are we able to recognise sounds?
We recognise sounds because our speech centres in our brains have been stimulated from a very young age. When we're born, we don't have that recognition, but as we're exposed to speech, the brain builds up our vocabulary and we recognise the sound from what we hear.
So how many different sort of sounds do you think that we are able to recognise?
Oh, there's very many. We have what we call different frequency of sound. What they mean by that is there's different pitch of sound. So you can have very deep sounds right up to very high pitch sounds.
So do quite often people hear some frequencies but not others?
That's correct, Mel. What happens mainly through age and noise is that we lose some of the higher frequency sounds. Now, in this little cochlea, we were talking about the hearing cells. Well, different hair cells pick up different frequency of sound. So the ones at the start are what we call the ones that pick up the high frequency sounds. So they get the full impact of the vibration of sound all the time. So they're the ones that wear out the most quickly. Now, unfortunately with speech, most of the sounds that are the consonants are the higher pitched sounds.
Right.
So when people lose the hearing, they start missing out on the consonants, which means that they may hear words, but they are not picking up the sounds that tell them what the words are. Of course, you can have lower frequency hearing loss as well, which can occur from other problems, but usually through age and noise, it's those higher sounds. This also happens when people get accused of selective hearing.
Yeah.
You know, I could say something like, let's have fish for tea, and for someone with a high frequency loss, that may be quite difficult for them to pick up, especially maybe in background noise or something like that. However, I could say, let's have blue cod for dinner. Now those sounds are deeper and that person may pick up that sentence much more easily. When people don't understand how hearing works, they think that the person's having a very convenient hearing loss. But no, it actually is the truth. They can hear some things better than others.
Wow, that's really interesting. So being exposed to things like loud music, can that really damage our ears?
It can absolutely damage your ears. Loud music, chainsaws, shooting, all that sort of thing. It introduces a vibration that's extremely strong and it will hit the little hair cells in there, and if it's loud enough, it'll knock them over straight away. If it's quite loud, they might last a little while, but the more we expose them to that noise, the weaker they'll get. Eventually they'll fall over, and once those little hair cells are damaged, they don't get back up again. So it's very important that people protect their hearing.
And how can we protect our hearing?
Well,
what's the best ways?
Yeah, ear muffs are the obvious things, hearing protection, earplugs. There is a lot of protection out there. If you are, say, a musician and you don't want to miss out on the melodies and things like that, you don't need to. There's special protection that will cut out the higher or the more damaging sound, but allow you to still hear the melodies and things that you need to hear. If you don't need to worry about that sort of thing, you've got earmuffs for things like lawn mowing. Chainsaws are another terrible thing. You should always wear earmuffs for that sort of thing. Loud music in cars, yeah, turn it down. iPods are another one that can be quite damaging.
Right, because it's right in the ear.
It's right in the ear. And what happens often is that those little earbuds don't cut out a lot of the background noise, so people tend to turn it up to get over that background noise. Great. And it's we have a 60-60 rule. You don't have it over 60% of the volume, you don't turn it up above that, and you don't play it more than an hour at that volume.
Really? That's good, I'll keep that in mind.
If you've got any concerns about your hearing, you should always have it checked out by a hearing therapist, an audiologist, or your doctor.
You're a great teacher, Tracy.
Oh, thank you.
Can I have a hearing test while I'm here?
You can indeed. So what we'll do, Mel, is I'll get you to pop these headphones on.
Fantastic.
And we'll put some sounds into your ears, and we'll find the quietest sound that you can hear at each frequency. And you take this button and you just push it every time you can hear a sound.
Okay. We're back again with Craig, but this time it's taste. Why do we need to be able to taste things?
Well, if we think back to what we looked at with smell, again, it's one of those evolutionary things that keeps us alive, basically. If you find something that you're not terribly sure about, we tend to taste it to see if it's okay. You think of babies.
I was just thinking of wee kids.
First thing babies do if they're not sure about something is they put it straight in their mouth. Not only to feel it with their gums, but also to taste it. Does it taste good? Doesn't it taste good? That's why, as adults, we don't tend to eat things like snails and put coal in our mouths, because probably as babies we learned it doesn't taste good.
So how does this happen, this taste process?
Right, well, just like smell, this is one of our chemical senses. And taste is the weakest sense we've got.
Why is that?
I'm not particularly sure. The others are just far more sensitive if you think of sight and smell and so on. And we have the ability to taste these basic ones here, and different parts of your tongue taste different things.
So, oh, gee.
So, right at the very back of your tongue, pretty much, that's where we taste things that are bitter, the bitter tastes, bitter aftertastes, right at the back of the tongue. On the side of our tongue, on each side here, we taste sour. So, sucking on the lemon, and if you just close your eyes and think about sucking on a lemon, you can just almost feel it on the very sides of your tongues.
And the same with the bitter, it really is, isn't it? The
It's
back.
right at the back. Salty is down near the front. And we like the taste of salt. Salt makes food taste more, it gives it a stronger sense of taste.
Right.
Helps it out. And right at the very tip of our tongue is sweet.
Licking an ice cream.
Licking the ice cream with the tip of your tongue, because that's straight into sweet. We don't tend to get ice cream very often that's salty and sour and bitter. That's why we lick it with the tip of our tongue.
Gee, that's really fascinating, isn't it?
And it works similar to what we had with our sense of smell. We've got about, oh, here's another one. Some researchers say that we now have another sense of taste that we can add to all these, called this umami, because it was found by some Japanese people. It's being able to taste savouriness.
Really?
I don't know where it is on the tongue,
I'm
but
had to fit in the middle, somebody you'd think.
we'll leave it with those ones for now. So, we've got about 10,000 taste buds in our mouths.
Gee, so what exactly is a taste bud?
Well, if you think that think of like a cotton bud with this little domed end on it, that's what we have all over the surface of our tongue and on the roofs of our mouths.
Oh,
Some are little hollow pits. Some are little hollow pits with hairs sticking up out of them. Some of them are little wee domes, like little wee mushrooms.
Great mental picture,
Yeah.
isn't it?
All
so
over
how
the
many
surface.
taste buds would we have in our mouths?
About 10,000. 10,000 is normal.
Right.
Distributed over the whole place, and they work with the food that we have, releases chemicals that go down and stimulate nerve endings right underneath our tongue, and that sends an electrical signal straight up into the brain to our taste centre, and we link it to the memories that we've got, and we go, yeah, I know that taste.
Right. So what makes us like the taste of some things but not others?
Experience. For example, I like the taste of licorice, probably because it's sweet, and that links into my brain, and I like the taste of it. But if you've ever had Dutch licorice is really salty. And if you're not used to it, if you know that when you eat this piece of licorice it's going to taste sweet, and it actually tastes salty, don't like it. It doesn't match up with the memory.
How come some of us have different palates though? Like some people like really spicy hot food but others can't cope with it?
Experience and what you're used to. And that's quite a good point, because with this one here, we struggle to get the flavour of food when we have a blocked nose, because taste and smell mainly combine to make flavour. In fact, taste is mostly smell. So, for example, if your nose is blocked, you tend to be able to have slightly hotter food.
Right. And I suppose it does come into experience, like if we were born in India, we'd probably, it's all we'd eat would be hot food, so you get used to the norm as well, wouldn't you?
What we're used to.
Oh, very good.
But some people are these.
Super tasters.
Super tasters. 25% of the population have more taste buds than normal, so they've got
Gee.
they're more densely packed all over the surface of their tongue and the roof of their mouth than normal, and they're called super tasters.
And why? Why have some people got more than others?
That's just the way it seems to be. Most of them, oddly enough, are women.
Really? And are they the more foodie sorts of people?
Well, we could say that, but again, it comes back to experience. Some people have had exposure to a wide range of foods,
Right.
and therefore, whenever they taste something, links to that memory and they can recall what it is.
How come some things, you know, it's like an acquired taste, like olives or wine, like you're not really sure, you don't really like the taste of them at first, but then you warm into them?
Practice.
Practice?
Practice tasting it and getting used to it. Again, it also comes back to the quality of food that you eat. Some people don't like the taste of cheap olives, but they like the taste of quality olives.
Yeah, it is that whole experience thing,
It is.
isn't it? That's really good. Thank you. I'm sure I must be a super taster. Thanks for your time,
Not
Craig.
a problem.
We all know how crucial our eyesight is. I'm here with Richard today, who's an optometrist, who's going to tell us exactly how the eye works. Richard, how many parts make up the eye?
There are a large number of parts that make up the eye, but we can think about them, I suppose, in a couple of groups. Those parts that do the focusing of the light and those parts that take the focus light, the image, and send them off to the brain.
So what are the first ones, the focus ones?
The first is the cornea, which is on the very front of the eye, and the tear film, which sits on top of that. So the cornea is a transparent membrane. It's a little bit less than a millimetre thick, and on its surface sits the tear film, the watery part that does the first focusing of the light. It's only about 50 microns thick.
Is it sort of like a protective layer?
It is protective. There are compounds in the tears which kill bacteria, and it also feeds some of the cells that sit on the top of the cornea, and it does the first focusing of the light that's coming into the eye. It's drying out all the time, of course, so we have to keep blinking and keep making tears to keep it in place.
Right, so is that why we blink? I've always wondered, is that just to keep the eye sort of moisturised?
It's to spread the tear film that sits in a little layer along the edge of the eyelids. The blinking spreads that across the surface of the eye.
Great, so and what about the second part of the eye?
In behind the cornea we've got a water-filled space that we call the anterior, meaning front chamber of the eye, and behind the interior, or at the back of the anterior chamber, we've got the iris, which is what most people recognise as the coloured part of the eye. It's like a flexible curtain that opens and closes to let the right amount of light back to the retina so that we can see comfortably and clearly at different light levels.
So how come people have different colour irises?
Depends on the amount of melanin and xanthophyll pigment that's in the front surface of the iris that determines its colour. Very little pigment makes your eyes blue. Lots of melanin, the brown pigment makes your eyes brown.
And so how come some people are colour blind?
Colour vision defects in the vast majority of cases are inherited from our mother. Women carry the defective colour gene and pass it on to their children, and because men have only one copy of that genetic information, if they get that defective gene, then they will have a colour vision weakness. Women carry two copies, and because colour vision information, colour vision defects are recessive, if you've got a good copy then you have normal colour vision. It's also the reason why men are much more likely to have colour vision defects than women.
Right. I've often wondered, how do we know we all see the same tones?
That's quite a difficult question to answer, but you can test how people perceive colour by looking at how well they're able to detect differences between colours, and that's the basis of colour vision testing, seeing whether people can tell particular colours apart.
Right. So is it possible you could be colourblind and not even be aware of it?
It's very often the case, particularly if colour vision weakness is relatively mild. So actual colour blindness is quite rare, very seldom see that, but milder forms of colour vision weakness are relatively common. About 8% of males will have some degree of colour vision.
Very good. And how is it that our eyesight usually deteriorates as we get older? What is that?
Well, there can be a number of causes for diminished eyesight. The usual change that's noticed in middle age is a loss of ability to read comfortably, and that's all to do with changes in the lens inside our eye. So just behind the iris, you can see on the model here a lens shape. In our own eyes, that lens is flexible. We can change its shape so that we can adjust its focusing power for looking at different distances. But it's one of the few parts of our body that grows right throughout your life, and as it grows it becomes more rigid and it gets more difficult for us to change its shape enough to read comfortably, and that's why people get reading glasses usually in their late 40s and early 50s. So that's the most common age-related eyesight change we see at that age.
Right.
Later in life, the lens starts to go cloudy, and we call that cataract. So that makes our vision misty and hazy, and often accompanying that are changes in the retina at the back of the eye, where there is loss of light receptors. So we call that macular degeneration. It is a leading cause of eyesight problems in the older generation.
So it's the retina that lets the light in to the eye?
Retina is like the film in a camera.
Okay.
So the focusing parts of the eye produce an image of the outside world on the film or the retina, and then the retina records that picture and sends it off to the brain down through the optic nerve.
And before we started the interview, you actually took a photo of the back of my eye. Would I be able to have a look at that?
Sure, let's do that now. So this is a magnified picture of the back of your right eye, and it's about 1.5 millimetres from there down to there, so you can see this is quite enlarged. That's called the optic disc, and it's the face of the optic nerve. It's the gathering place of all the nerve fibres that are carrying a picture from the retinal surface to the vision centres in the brain. This area, this hazy spot here, is called the macula, and it's the part of the eye that's specialised for colour vision and looking at detail. So when we want to look at a person's face or read something, we move our eye so the image of it lies across that area of maximum light colour sensitivity.
Great, thank you very much for sharing that with us, Richard. That's been really interesting. Hope you have enjoyed learning about the senses along with us today. I know I've sure learnt a lot. Join us next week. We'll be looking at the cardiovascular and the respiratory systems. We'll see you then.